It was still dark outside when the pounding on my bedroom door jolted me awake. Not a gentle knock, not someone checking if I was up. This was the sharp, impatient kind you'd use on a stranger who owed you money. I blinked the sleep out of my eyes and reached for my phone on the nightstand. 5 in the morning. Before I could even sit up, my bedroom door pushed open without permission, letting in a hallway light so bright it sliced through the room. Maggie stood there, with her arms crossed, her hair perfectly curled even at this hour, her expression tight with annoyance. "Get up," she ordered. "We need coffee made and the table set before my in-laws wake up. This is your responsibility if you're staying here." The words punched the air out of my lungs. Responsibility. Behind her, I could hear the muffled voices of the Hudsons, Brandon's mother, father, and older brother, talking loudly downstairs as if they owned the place. This house, my parents' house. The house I grew up in. The house Maggie and I inherited together. But Maggie spoke as if I were some live-in maid she could summon at dawn. She tapped her heel against the floor. "Mom always said the older sister should keep things running, so move. They want breakfast by 6. I stared at her, still half tangled in my blanket but fully awake from humiliation. I had only come back here a month ago after losing my marketing job, needing somewhere safe to stay, until I got back on my feet. I never expected my own sister to twist that vulnerability into this. As I dragged myself out of bed, one thought burned through the fog. When did Maggie start treating me like I was hers to command? By the time I reached the kitchen, the Hudsons were already making themselves comfortable. Brandon's mother was rearranging the fruit bowl like she owned the place. His father was flipping through the morning mail. His brother was sprawled across the couch with his feet on the coffee table. No one greeted me. No one acknowledged that I lived here too. They just glanced in my direction with the kind of polite disinterest you'd give a hotel staff member. I moved quietly, starting the coffee machine, trying not to drop anything, even though my hands were trembling. I felt the weight of Maggie's gaze behind me, supervising, evaluating, just like she had been doing for weeks now. Somehow, the girl who once cried if she scraped her knee had turned into someone who issued orders like a CEO. When I brought out the first tray of coffee cups, I heard Hudson mother mutter under her breath, "She's slow, slow," as if this was my job, as if they were paying me, as if I were here to serve them breakfast in bed at 5 in the morning. I set the cups down gently to hide the sting of embarrassment. Maggie breezed past me, smiling brightly at her in-laws and pretending she had done all the work. "Everything will be ready soon," she said sweetly, gesturing at the table I had to set by myself. "Laura's helping out, helping out." The phrase sounded wrong, like a lie told to preserve her image. Helping implied I volunteered. Helping implied I was part of the family event. Helping implied I had a choice. I didn't. While I arranged the silverware, Brandon walked by, inspecting the setup with unnecessary scrutiny. "Forks go on the left," he said without looking at me. "This is basic." I forced myself to swallow the irritation. I wanted to scream, "I know how forks work," but the words stayed stuck in my throat. I'd been swallowing too much lately. No matter how fast I moved, there was always something wrong. Plates are uneven. Coffee is too weak. Fruit isn't sliced right. Maggie and the Hudsons fired criticisms like arrows, not out of malice but entitlement. They genuinely believed I owed them this. As I made yet another pot of coffee, I caught them whispering. Maggie's voice was light, casual, as if she wasn't talking about a human being. "Laura needs structure," she told her mother-in-law. "This kind of routine is good for her." Good for me. The words hit harder than any insult that morning. It was strange how quickly the definitions had changed in this house. A month ago, I was the older sister Maggie looked up to. A month ago, she thanked me for letting her and Brandon stay here until they got back on their feet. A month ago, she called this a team effort. But now, I wasn't a sister. I was unpaid labor dressed up as family duty. "Laura," Maggie called sharply from the dining room. "You forgot the water pitchers." I closed my eyes for a second, grounding myself. Breathe in, breathe out. Don't cry in front of them. The brunch went on painfully, Maggie playing the role of elegant hostess, while I floated around the room refilling glasses and clearing plates like an invisible worker. The Hudsons complimented the wonderful hosting, and Maggie accepted every praise without once acknowledging who had actually done the work. When it was finally over, I gathered dishes in silence. My back hurt, my eyes burned with exhaustion, and my heart felt like something was cracking inside it. As I walked through the living room, I spotted Maggie huddled with one of Brandon's cousins. They were laughing softly. When the cousin saw me pass, she lowered her voice, but not enough. "You're so lucky," she whispered to Maggie. "Not everyone gets a free helper at home." My body froze. Maggie didn't correct her. She didn't say she's my sister. She didn't say she's not a helper. She didn't defend me at all. Instead, she nodded. She nodded. I was shaking as I carried the last tray to the kitchen. How long had this been going on? How long had they been talking about me like this? How long had Maggie been crafting this story that I was useless, that I lived here for free, that I needed to earn my keep when I finished the dishes and walked back through the hallway? Something caught my eye on the floor near Maggie's purse. A crumpled piece of paper she must have dropped. I picked it up thoughtlessly, ready to toss it in the trash, until I saw what was written across the top. Household duties, staff assignment, and right below it in bold letters, primary support Laura daily responsibilities, cooking, cleaning, morning prep, table setting, hosting assistance. My heart stopped. I gripped the paper so tightly it wrinkled more. This wasn't stress. This wasn't Maggie having a bad week. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. She had written it down, formalized it, labeled me as the staff. The staff. The house felt too quiet suddenly, as if the walls themselves were listening. I stood alone in the hallway, the paper trembling in my hands, the weight of betrayal settling deep in my chest. This wasn't just about breakfast. It was about my place in this home. And Maggie had already decided what she wanted that place to be. The sticky note on the fridge was waiting for me the next morning, bright yellow and impossible to miss. I walked into the kitchen, still half asleep, hoping maybe Maggie had woken up early to make coffee herself for once. But no. Instead, I found her handwriting, sharp, slanted, and bossy, plastered right in the center of the refrigerator door. Laura, wipe counters, empty dishwasher, sweep floors. Do this before noon. M. I stared at it for a long moment, the words blurring together. Yesterday it had been waking me at 5 in the morning. Today it was a written list of chores. I hadn't slept well, not after seeing that household duties, staff assignment sheet Maggie had dropped. The idea of her writing the word staff next to my name still burned like a fresh bruise. I peeled the sticky note off the fridge, crumpled it in my fist, then set it gently on the counter. I didn't have the strength to fight, not yet. I just needed coffee. But the coffee machine was already full of grounds from yesterday, waiting for me to clean it. Of course it was. While the water heated, my eyes drifted to the calendar on the wall. The one my mother used to write little notes on birthdays, dental appointments, holiday meals. Maggie had replaced it with a sleek, minimalist planner full of events, titled Hudson Family Brunch, Hudson Dinner Prep, Hudson Game Night. No mention of Laura anywhere. I didn't know when it had happened, but this no longer felt like my parents' home. It felt like a stage Maggie was redesigning to feature herself, and I was the lighting crew in the background. I began wiping the counters, trying not to cry. I didn't want to give this house or these people any more of my tears. But remembering how it all began made my chest ache. 6 months ago, Maggie and Brandon had shown up with hopeful smiles and promises that they'd stay just a little while. They'd lost their apartment after Brandon switched jobs, and Maggie claimed they needed a place to regroup. She had hugged me tight, thanking me for being the responsible big sister. I still remember hugging her back, relieved to have family close, thinking it would be good for all of us. Back then, Maggie asked for help sweetly. "Can you fold this laundry? I'm so overwhelmed. Can you start the rice? I'm running behind." Can you grab the mail? Brandon's expecting something important? It felt so small, so simple, and I had free time between job applications, so I didn't mind. But soon the tone of her request changed. It wasn't, "Can you?" anymore. It became, "You should. You should tidy up the living room before they arrive. You should make dinner tonight. Brandon had a long day. You should vacuum upstairs. It's your turn. Your turn." Duties, responsibilities. When had this become a system? 3 weeks after they arrived, Maggie announced a house meeting. I still remember her sitting at the dining table with that faux serious expression she used to mimic corporate managers. "We need structure," she had said, "to keep things running smoothly." She presented a chore schedule she'd typed up and printed in color. It was organized in neat grids like something out of an office. Except every single task was assigned to me. I had laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke. Brandon hadn't laughed. Maggie hadn't even smiled. Instead, they both nodded at me, waiting for agreement, as if I were the intern at their new startup. After that, chores weren't requests anymore. They were expectations. And the Hudsons? Oh, they fed the fire gladly. A well-run home requires everyone knowing their role. Hudson mother had said one night as I served dinner. If she's living here without rent, she should contribute. Hudson father had muttered over dessert. Contribute. They loved that word. It excused everything. I finished mopping the kitchen and moved on to the dishwasher. It wasn't even full, but Maggie insisted it be run daily. Cleanliness is important, she always said. But whenever she said cleanliness, she meant performing for her in-laws. As I stacked the plates, I heard footsteps behind me. Brandon walked in yawning, already dressed for work. He barely looked at me. "Make sure the table is clean before I get home," he said casually, as if commenting on the weather. "And don't forget the guest towels. We're having people over this weekend." He didn't say please. He didn't ask whether I had plans. He didn't even acknowledge that I existed outside of my chores. I kept my eyes on the dishes, choosing silence instead of the argument burning in my throat. When Brandon left the room, I stood there gripping the edge of the counter until my heartbeat slowed. I needed air. I needed something that didn't make me feel like I was shrinking. I grabbed my purse and walked to my part-time job at the flower shop. The moment I stepped inside, the scent of fresh lilies and roses wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Soft music played in the background, sunlight filtered through the windows, and for the first time that day I exhaled. And then I heard a voice behind me, bright, warm, familiar. "Laura, is that really you?" I turned, and there she was, Hannah. My high school best friend. The one person who had always told me I deserved better long before I understood what that meant. We hugged tightly, laughing and talking over each other in excitement. It had been years since I last saw her. She stepped back and studied my face with concern. "You okay?" she asked. "You look tired." I forced a smile. "Just a lot going on. Let's grab coffee on your break," she insisted. At the cafe down the street, we sat by the window. I tried to talk about harmless things. My job hunt, the flower shop, the weather, but Hannah wasn't fooled. So she said gently, "What's going on at home?" The question cracked something inside me. Words poured out before I could stop them. "It's just temporary," I said quickly. "I'm helping Maggie and Brandon. They've been stressed. They need me right now." Hannah looked at me the way only an old friend could, seeing straight past the excuses. "Helping," she repeated. "Or doing everything." I laughed weakly. "It's not that bad." But Hannah didn't smile. Her voice dropped to a serious, steady tone I hadn't heard in years. "I've been where you are," she said. "When people with controlling personalities find someone who won't fight back, they don't ask for help, they assign it." I stared at her, stunned. She continued, "They guilt you, they twist things. They make you feel like you owe them. And the whole time, they're the ones taking advantage." I felt my throat tighten. "Maggie's not like that." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" I wasn't. For the first time, I truly wasn't. I told her about the sticky notes. The chore lists, the brunch disaster, the way Maggie dismissed me in front of the Hudsons. I didn't tell her everything, just enough for her to understand. Hannah leaned forward. Laura, they're not just using you. They're training you. A cold shock ran through me. Back at home, nothing had changed, but I had. Hannah's words sat heavy in my chest. As soon as I opened the door, Maggie shoved a grocery list into my hand. I need you to pick these up. Hudsons are coming tomorrow. Make it quick. I stared at her, really stared at her, studying the tone she used, the entitlement in her voice. She wasn't asking, she was expecting. For the first time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. Later, when I was alone in my room, I pulled out a notebook and began writing everything down. Every task, every insult, every moment I felt lesser in my own home. Helping is one thing. Servitude is another. By dinner, the house felt heavy again. Maggie criticizing everything I did, Brandon monitoring every move, Hudson mother making snide remarks like she was grading my performance. But I wasn't shrinking this time. I was watching. I was learning. And as I went to bed that night, I heard Maggie whisper to Brandon outside my door, their voices low but unmistakably smug. She doesn't suspect a thing. My eyes opened in the dark. They were wrong. I was finally starting to see everything. I sat at the edge of my bed long after midnight, the crumpled household duties. Staff assignment sheet still burned into my thoughts. I kept seeing my name printed beneath the words primary support. It felt less like a label and more like a sentence. But what haunted me even more wasn't the chores, they were just the surface. It was Maggie's quiet certainty, the way she moved around the house, as if it belonged entirely to her, the way the Hudsons acted like I was simply temporary in my own childhood home. That thought struck me like a sudden gust of cold air. By early morning, I found myself wandering the hallway, unable to sleep. My parents' old bedroom door stood slightly open, the way it had been ever since Maggie reorganized the space for storage. I pushed it gently, letting memories wash over me as sunlight stretched across the floorboards. My parents' home had once felt warm, sturdy, familiar. Now it felt like a stage from which I had been quietly removed. A drawer in the old filing cabinet stood crooked, as though someone had rifled through it too quickly. Something pulled me toward it. I tugged it open and stared at the half-empty folder, labeled Will and Property Papers, in my mother's handwriting. My stomach tightened. Inside were only a few tax papers, some photocopies, and a faded envelope. The official will, where was it? The original deed documents missing. Even the notarized copies were gone. I pulled out the only sheet left that resembled a legal document. It was a photocopy of the will, but the edges were torn, and someone had scribbled notes in the margins with a black pen. Notes that did not belong to my mother. On the side of the first page, written in Maggie's handwriting, I saw, "We can challenge this." A faint sticky note clung to the back page. "Discuss with Brandon before filing." I sank onto the edge of the bed, the paper trembling in my hand. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I tried to steady my breathing, but anxiety tightened around my ribs. Why would Maggie keep this from me? Why would she need to discuss our parents' will with Brandon? Why were the originals missing? A shadow of betrayal slipped across my thoughts. Maggie had taken over the filing cabinet months ago, insisting she handle the boring paperwork. I hadn't questioned her then. I trusted her. She was my sister. But suddenly, every moment she avoided talking about the inheritance replayed sharply in my mind. "Let's not worry about the legal stuff right now," she'd said once with a hand wave. "It's just paperwork. I'll handle it," she'd said another time, snapping when I asked too many questions. Now the truth was sitting in front of me like an open wound. She had kept me away from these documents deliberately. When I finally forced myself to stand, I moved through the hallway with new eyes. Details I'd overlooked before seemed glaring. Family photos of the Hudsons on the mantel. Maggie's plush throw pillows replacing my mother's. Brandon's toolboxes crowding my father's old shelves. the guest room redecorated with soft blues and a sign that said Baby Dreams, as if the house belonged to them, as if my parents had never lived here, as if I never had. I walked slowly down the stairs, the realization cutting deeper with every step. Maggie and the Hudsons weren't just living here, they were settling and rooting themselves, expanding, occupying space until no one else fit. I was becoming invisible inside my own inheritance. Later that afternoon, while dusting the bookshelf in the living room, I found a thin folder wedged between two cookbooks. It wasn't labeled. I pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside was a clearer photocopy of the will. At first glance it seemed normal, but when I looked closer, I noticed a few horrifying details. Someone had crossed out a line with dark pen ink. A line that read, "The property is to be shared equally between my daughters Laura and Margaret." My vision blurred for a moment. I gripped the paper to steady myself. Someone had physically crossed me out. Below the scratched-out line was a handwritten note, "Unstable, not working. Use this." I felt like the breath had been punched out of my lungs. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the folder. The room swayed for a moment, and I had to press a hand against the wall to keep myself standing. They weren't only trying to control me, they were building a case against me. Suddenly memories came crashing back. Maggie telling Brandon Laura's not really back on her feet yet. Hudson mother saying, "People who don't contribute shouldn't make decisions about property." Brandon joking to his cousin, "We'll have this place figured out in a few months." Had that been a joke or a timeline? I swallowed hard and stepped away from the bookshelf, heart pounding in my ears. I remembered a dinner months earlier when Brandon and his brother were whispering in the kitchen. "All you need is the right paperwork," his brother had said. "Once she's out of the picture, the house is yours." At the time I thought they were talking about a job application. Now I wasn't so sure. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my spiraling thoughts. A text from Maggie. "Dinner at 7. Make pasta. No question mark, no please. Just another command." When she walked in the door that evening, I watched her with new clarity. The way she dropped her purse on the table without greeting me. The way she kicked off her shoes in the exact spot I had just cleaned. The way she snatched the mail and sorted it before I could even glance at it. Always in control. Always supervising. Always managing. Over dinner I tried to bring up the missing documents, keeping my voice steady. "Have you seen the original will? It wasn't in the cabinet?" Maggie's fork froze midair. She didn't look at me. "Why are you snooping?" she snapped. "I wasn't snooping. I was looking for what?" she demanded sharply. "Reasons to accuse me of something, God, Laura. You're so paranoid lately." Brandon leaned back in his chair, giving me that assessing look he always used before gaslighting someone. "She's stressed," he told Maggie. "She's imagining problems." I felt heat flood my cheeks. I didn't imagine the missing documents. Maggie slammed her fork down. "Drop it, Laura." I said. "I'm handling the paperwork." "But it's our inheritance," I said. "Drop it." Her voice cracked through the room like a snapped tree branch. Hudson mother shot me a grim, disapproving look from across the table. I fell silent, but inside something hardened. That night, after they all went to bed, I drifted to the kitchen in the dark for a glass of water. On the counter sat Maggie's purse, half unzipped, as if she'd rummaged through it before bed. A small envelope peeked out the corner, sticking just far enough to show the handwriting. My mother's handwriting. My stomach twisted. I pulled the envelope free with trembling fingers. Inside was a single note written years ago. "If anything ever happens to me, make sure both of you review the will together. Don't sign anything alone." My breath caught in my throat. Why was this hidden? Why had Maggie kept it from me? Why had she buried it inside her purse? The kitchen felt cold. The house felt foreign, and for the first time I felt truly afraid. Not of the chores, not of the criticism, not of the Hudsons, but of the realization that my little sister, the girl I once protected from neighborhood bullies, might be trying to erase me from my own home. I walked back to my room, clutching the note like a lifeline. As I closed the door behind me, A final thought settled heavily inside me. They weren't waiting for me to leave. They were planning it. The next morning, I woke to the faint sound of voices drifting through the vent above my bed. It wasn't unusual. Maggie and the Hudsons were early risers, but today the voices carried tension, quick and hushed. I pushed off the blanket and sat up the cold air, brushing my bare arms as I strained to hear. "She's getting too curious," Brandon muttered. "Then keep her busy," Maggie snapped. "The more she works, the less she snoops." My chest tightened. They weren't even pretending anymore. I moved quietly to the door, easing it open just enough to listen. Maggie was standing in the hallway, her back against the wall, her voice low but sharp. "She thinks this is still her house," she hissed. "She doesn't understand how things work now." A flash of heat rose up my spine. My house. My parents' house. Hearing her say that out loud made something claw inside my ribs. Footsteps approached. I shut the door quickly and slipped back into bed, pretending to sleep. A moment later, Maggie pushed the door open without knocking, her usual habit now, and flicked on the overhead light. "Laura," she said, her voice sweeter than honey left too long in the sun. "You're up, right? We need to talk." I blinked, squinting exaggeratedly. "It's barely 7. "Perfect," she said, crossing her arms. She walked farther into the room, glancing around as if checking whether I'd cleaned properly. Her eyes drifted across my dresser, my laundry basket, my nightstand, searching. Always searching. I pulled the blanket up to hide the notebook I'd been documenting everything in. "We're adjusting some things in the house," she announced. "Since you've been struggling with keeping up, we've decided to clarify expectations." Expectations. The word slithered across my nerves. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. Maggie reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She handed it to me with a satisfied smile, the kind of smile someone wears when they think they're helping, but really they're tightening the leash. "Your task list," she said. "Weekly responsibilities. Just so we're on the same page." I unfolded the paper slowly. My heart sank before I even finished scanning it. Monday, deep clean kitchen. Tuesday, grocery shopping, Hudson. Approved list. Wednesday, vacuum. Second floor mop stairs. Thursday, bathroom sanitation. Guest priority Friday. Prep for weekend visits. Daily breakfast at 6 dishes, laundry table. Prep living room tidy. At the bottom, Maggie had written failure to complete tasks equals consequences. I stared at that last line, disbelief rippling through me. "Consequences," I repeated softly. Maggie didn't flinch. "We're adults, Laura. Adults have responsibilities. If you need support to stay on track, I'm offering structure." "Structure," I whispered. "You're scheduling my life." "It's for your own good," she said, brushing imaginary lint from her robe. "And for the household." I felt something in me tilt like a bookshelf overloaded with weight. "Maggie, you can't expect me to do all this." Her expression didn't change. "Well, someone has to. Brandon works. I work. You're here." I inhaled sharply. "I'm not your employee." Maggie's jaw tightened. "Don't be dramatic." She turned and left the room without waiting for a response, the door swinging behind her. The paper trembled in my hand. After a moment of frozen silence, anger flooded me so fast I had to stand pacing the room as the list crinkled in my fist. Consequences. For what? Not being her maid, not bowing to the Hudsons' endless demands. I shoved on a sweater and went downstairs for air. But the moment I reached the living room, Brandon's brother was lounging on the couch again, his shoes on the coffee table, eating the last of the cereal I'd bought. He didn't even look at me as he said, "Hey, can you get me a spoon?" Didn't want to get up. I didn't move. Slowly, he glanced up. "You deaf or something?" The anger burst through my restraint. "Get it yourself." His eyebrows shot up. "Damn. Someone's cranky." Hudson mother swept in at that moment, her lips already pursed. "Tone, Laura. A woman in your position should know how to speak respectfully. A woman in my position." My hands curled into fists at my sides. What position is that exactly? I asked, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. Oh, sweetheart, she said, patting my arm like I was an elderly dog when you live in someone else's home. This is my home too, I snapped. Her smile flickered, then sharpened. Maggie didn't mention that you're getting sensitive again. Again. That word hit like a slap. It didn't matter what I said, every protest became proof of my instability. I turned away to keep from screaming. I walked into the kitchen, my breath shaking. For a moment I just gripped the edge of the counter, grounding myself, letting the cool surface keep me from falling apart. That was when I saw a drawer left open an inch the corner of a paper sticking out. I pulled it open and stared. Inside were dozens of receipts, every single one from the past 3 months. Every single one under the name Margaret Hudson. I slid into a chair, the paper spilling around me. High-end restaurants, fancy skincare, designer shoes, home decor, luxurious spa appointments, boxes shipped to our house, meals delivered when I was the one cooking every night. The totals were staggering. $180, $245, $320, $410. And at the end of one receipt, bold letters, payment method, credit line HUD 23. My pulse hammered through me. They were living richly off credit taken out under this address. Under my house. I dropped the receipts back into the drawer as footsteps approached. I shut it quickly, my heart still racing, and turned to see Maggie entering the kitchen. She glanced at my expression, her eyes narrowing. "What's wrong with you now?" I swallowed hard. "Nothing." She gave me a skeptical look and then leaned in slightly. "Listen, I need you to clean the guest room today. Brandon's cousin is coming again. And for God's sake, don't forget to iron the sheets this time. Appearance matters." Words pressed against my throat, accusations, demands, screams, but I pushed them down. Not yet. I needed more proof, more knowledge, more understanding of just how deep their plans went. As I cleaned the guest room later, folding crisp corners and spraying lavender on pillows, Maggie would claim credit for my mind, replayed every strange comment, every whispered conversation, every time she seized the mail first. She was building something, a narrative, a case, a foundation, one that didn't include me. As I tucked the last sheet into place, Brandon passed by the doorway and muttered, "Good. You're finally doing your part." I stood still, staring at him, something cold and sharp forming inside me. He didn't notice. He walked away. But I wasn't the same woman I had been yesterday. By evening, as the Hudsons laughed loudly in the living room, as Maggie complained about the emotional labor she carried, as I cooked dinner with quiet precision, I made a silent promise to myself. They thought I was blind. They thought I was weak. They thought they could rewrite the story of this house and scrub my name out of it. But they were wrong. I was paying attention now, and I wasn't going to disappear. I came home from my shift at the flower shop, feeling drained but grateful for a few hours away from the chaos. My shoulders ached from arranging bouquets all morning, and all I wanted was 10 minutes of silence in my room before Maggie started barking orders again. But when I stepped through the front door, a strange stillness hung in the air, a tense, unnatural quiet, like the house was holding its breath. Something was wrong. I walked upstairs slowly, feeling that prickling chill along my spine. When I reached my bedroom, my heart dropped. The door was cracked open. I always closed it fully. Always. A knot tightened in my stomach as I pushed the door wider. My clothes were shifted. The blanket on my bed was folded differently. My desk drawer, the one where I kept my journals, was not flush against the frame. And then I saw it, my private journal, lying open on the bed. Open. Someone had read it. My throat tightened. I walked slowly to the bed, each step sending cold needles down my arms. I picked up the journal and flipped through the pages, scanning the handwriting. I recognized instantly my own fears, my loneliness, my confusion, my entries about Maggie. My entries about feeling overwhelmed. Things I'd never spoken aloud to anyone except paper. I felt violated. "I see you found it," Maggie said from the doorway. I spun around. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, her expression disturbingly calm, as if she'd simply borrowed a shirt or borrowed my phone charger. "You were in my room." My voice sounded thin, shaky. She shrugged. "You left the door open." "No," I said firmly. "I didn't." Her gaze hardened just a fraction. "Well, maybe you forgot. You've been forgetful lately." That twisting, slithering feeling of gaslighting slid under my skin. "Why were you reading my journal?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. You act like you're hiding state secrets. I was just checking on you. You've been acting off and someone had to make sure everything was okay." "That's not okay," I whispered. "You had no right." Maggie pushed off the doorframe and stepped into the room. "Stop being dramatic, Laura. If you don't want people seeing things, don't leave them lying around." "That's not what happened." She sighed impatiently as if I were the unreasonable one. "Look, we're all under pressure here. Maybe you don't realize how much stress you're putting on this household." I stared at her. "I'm putting pressure on this household?" "Yes," she snapped. "You're unpredictable, sensitive, emotional. Brandon and I can't keep managing everything while also worrying about you." My pulse hammered in my ears. "I don't need you to manage me," I said quietly. "Well, clearly someone has to." She brushed past me toward the closet, as if inspecting the room further, as though my privacy were optional. I stepped in her way. "Don't go in there." Maggie narrowed her eyes. "If there's something you don't want me to see, maybe you should ask yourself why." The cruelty in her voice made my stomach twist. "Get out," I said. It was the first time I'd spoken the words to her in months. She hesitated, giving me a long, calculating look before she finally turned toward the door. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, pausing with her hand on the knob. "This is our house, Laura, not just yours. If you expect privacy, maybe you should find somewhere else to stay." The door slammed behind her. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the bed, gripping the journal tightly, fighting the urge to scream. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold onto the pen I used to write the next line in my notebook of documentation. She went through my room. She read my journal. She said I have no right to privacy in my own home. I hadn't cried in days, not since everything started feeling like a nightmare I couldn't wake from, but a tear slipped down my cheek then. Not from sadness, from rage. I wiped it quickly and stood. I wasn't going to let her twist the truth. I needed proof, answers, evidence. Cleaning helped me think, so I went to the dining room to dust. That was when I noticed a drawer slightly open under the china cabinet. The same drawer she always snatched receipts from before I could see them. I tugged it open. A stack of receipts stared back at me, thick and rubber-banded together. My pulse quickened as I pulled them out and flipped through them. Dinner for $350 at a luxury steakhouse. Designer perfume for $210. Spa day package for $400. Hair extensions for $275. Shoes for $180. A dress for $390. All in the last few weeks. All addressed to Margaret Hudson, our home address. My breath caught. I dug deeper. Another batch of receipts, this time for home decor and cleaning supplies I'd never seen. Then one single piece of paper stood out, the slip of a bank envelope. Inside was a credit card statement. Limit increase approved. Primary cardholder, Margaret Hudson address. Our house total, due $8,742.19. My mouth went dry. They weren't just living off me. They were building credit lines off my house. Suddenly, Maggie's words made sense. Our house. Find somewhere else to stay. You're forgetful. We're managing you. She wasn't just controlling me. She was laying the groundwork to claim the house. I shoved the receipts back into the drawer as heavy footsteps approached. Brandon entered the dining room, wiping his hands on a towel. "Why are you snooping?" he asked, his eyes sharp. I wasn't. He stepped closer. "Maggie said you've been on edge. Maybe you should take a break from chores for a while. We'll tell you when we need something. Tell me when we need something. Not ask, tell. I felt sick. I'm going for a walk, I said, quickly brushing past him before he could block the doorway. The cold air outside shocked my system awake. I walked aimlessly down the street, each step loosening the grip of their voices in my head. I needed clarity. I needed someone who didn't think I was losing my mind. I needed Hannah. When she picked up the phone, her voice was soft but steady. Hey, what happened? I told her everything. The journal, the receipts, the credit line, the gaslighting, the invasion. There was a moment of silence. Then Hannah spoke with the fierce protectiveness only true friends can summon. Laura, this isn't normal. This isn't family. This is control. I know, I whispered, my voice cracking. You need to document everything. Keep it safe. And don't confront them yet. I won't, I said, gripping the phone. I'm done being blind. When I returned home, the house was unusually silent. Too silent. Maggie was whispering to one of Brandon's cousins in the living room. Her voice drifted toward me as I took off my shoes. She's adjusting, Maggie said softly, as if she were discussing a pet. She just needs more direction. The cousin laughed. Well, you've got a good setup. Free help while you two save for a house, I'd kill for that. Maggie smiled, proud, smug, pleased. Yeah, it's all working out. My hands tightened into fists. I turned and walked silently to my room, closing the door behind me. I took out my documentation notebook, opened to a blank page, and wrote with slow, steady strokes. They think I'm adjusting. They think I don't know. They think I'm theirs to control. But I'm awake now, and they have no idea what's coming. The morning after Maggie read my journal, I couldn't stand to be inside the house any longer than necessary. My skin felt too tight, my nerves stretched thin, and even breathing beneath that roof felt like inhaling someone else's anger. The second I finished the breakfast chores she'd assigned me, washing dishes, wiping counters, organizing the pantry by her ridiculous color-coded system, I grabbed my purse and walked out before anyone could stop me. The air outside was cool and soft, brushing my face like a blessing. I headed straight to the flower shop, my part-time refuge. The minute I stepped inside, I felt the tension in my shoulders loosen. Soft music filled the space, the kind with acoustic guitars and warm harmonies. The scent of fresh lilies and eucalyptus drifted around me. A little bell chimed as the door closed, sealing the chaos outside. Morning, Laura, my coworker called. We've got a shipment of hydrangeas in the back. Got it, I said, grabbing an apron. Work was the only place where no one demanded anything from me except simple, honest tasks. Arrange flowers, tie ribbons, take orders. No chore list taped to the fridge. No footsteps following me down the hall. No one calling me sensitive or unstable if I looked tired. I slipped into the rhythm, easily trim stems, remove extra leaves, place them in clean buckets. For a little while I could forget the nightmare unfolding at home. That peace lasted all of 10 minutes. Oh my God, a familiar voice said behind me, bright and warm like the sun cutting through clouds. Is that you? I turned, letting the hydrangeas fall gently into the bucket, and there she was, Hannah. My closest friend all through high school. The girl who used to dream of running a bakery with me. The one who had moved away years ago, but still felt like home every time I thought of her. Hannah, I gasped. She laughed and hugged me so tightly I nearly dropped my scissors. I thought it was you. Wow, it's been forever. I felt something inside me. Thaw. You look amazing, I said. So do you, she said, then paused, her expression shifting. Well, you look tired. Okay, I shrugged quickly. Too quickly. Just busy. Life, you know. Her eyes softened in that knowing way they always did. When's your break? You're coming to coffee with me. An hour later, we sat near the window of a small cafe down the street, steaming mugs in front of us. Hannah leaned forward with her chin on her hands, smiling the way she used to when she wanted me to spill everything. So she said, "What's going on?" I hesitated. How could I explain it without sounding dramatic, without sounding paranoid? without sounding like the version of me. Maggie kept painting unstable, oversensitive, a burden. I'm living with Maggie for now. I began cautiously. Just until I get on my feet. Hannah frowned. I thought you owned your parents' house together. We do, I said. But things got complicated. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just listened the way no one in my house ever did. They needed a place, I said. Brandon changed jobs and they couldn't afford rent. I wanted to help. I really did. And now, she asked. I stared into my coffee, watching the steam swirl. And now, I said slowly, I'm doing a lot. All the cooking, all the cleaning, laundry, grocery shopping, waking up early to set the table. Every day feels like I'm living someone else's life. And I don't know how it happened. Hannah didn't even blink. Okay, she said calmly. Helping is one thing. Being their unpaid maid is another. My throat tightened. It's not that bad. Laura, she said gently, you're defending them. I looked away. She pressed on. Let me ask you something. Are you doing chores because you want to? Or because they expect you to demand you to? I swallowed hard, because if I don't, Maggie gets upset, and the Hudsons complain, and everyone blames me for everything that goes wrong. Hannah leaned back. There it is. There what is, I asked. She spoke slowly, choosing every word with care. This isn't helping. This is training. Training, I echoed. People like Maggie, she said, they don't ask. They assign. They push boundaries. And every time you let something slide, they take more. That's not family. That's control. I let out a shaky laugh. You're exaggerating. Her expression didn't change. Tell me one thing, Laura, and be honest. Do you feel like you have any privacy in that house? I hesitated. Then the memory punched me, my journal lying open on my bed. My voice cracked. She goes through my room. Hannah's face changed. Laura, she read my journal, I whispered. She said it was because she was checking on me. Hannah exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. That's not checking. That's an invasion. I know, I said, my hands trembling around the mug. And I found receipts. Credit lines. She's been using the house address for loans and shopping, all under Margaret Hudson. Oh my God, Hannah whispered. That's fraud. And dangerous. I nodded, staring down at my coffee. Do you have proof? She asked. I'm collecting it, I said softly. But I'm scared. Hannah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Collect everything. Every receipt. Every schedule. Every message. And don't confront them, not yet. People who manipulate don't like being exposed. They will escalate. I nodded, swallowing the fear rising in my chest. And Laura, she added gently, you deserve better than this. When I returned home that afternoon, Maggie was waiting for me in the hallway with her arms folded tightly. You didn't tell me you were going out, she said coldly. I don't need permission, I replied, surprising both of us. Her eyes narrowed. You should communicate better. You left chores undone. I looked past her, noticing the task list still taped to the fridge. I walked to it, slowly peeled the tape from the top corner, and folded the paper in half without a word. What are you doing? Maggie demanded. I'll do what I need to do, I said calmly. But I'm not following this. The shock on her face was immediate and sharp. She wasn't used to resistance. Not from me. Don't test me, Laura, she warned. I'm just trying to help you. You're trying to control me, I said quietly. Her eyes flashed with something dark, fear maybe, or anger, but she said nothing. Later that night, lying awake, I heard her outside my door whispering to Brandon again. She's changing, Maggie said nervously. She's starting to notice things, Brandon grunted, then tightened the rules. No, she hissed. We can't let her slip away now. Slip away. The phrase chilled me. That was the moment I realized they weren't just using me. They were relying on me, my obedience, my labor, my silence. And as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, Hannah's words echoed in my mind. This isn't help, it's control, and it was time for that to change. The package was sitting on the front porch when I came home from work, propped neatly against the door, as if someone had placed it there with care. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Maggie was always ordering things. Shoes, serums, kitchen gadgets she never touched. But when I bent down to pick it up, the label made my breath hitch. Margaret Hudson, homeowner. Our home address, homeowner. My pulse thudded hard in my throat. I stood there, staring at the printed letters, until the world around me blurred. She wasn't Margaret Hudson here. She wasn't the homeowner. She was my sister. Half owner at most. But the confidence of that single word, homeowner, struck something deep and wrong. I carried the package inside. I didn't get 2 steps before Maggie swooped into the hallway like she'd been waiting behind the door. "What are you doing with that?" she said sharply. "I found it outside," I replied. She snatched it out of my hands. "Don't touch my mail. I just brought it in," I said, annoyingly calm. Her eyes darted to the label as if checking whether I'd read it. "It's nothing, just paperwork." Then, more pointedly, "You don't need to worry about anything addressed to me." Homeowner pulsed in my mind like a neon sign. "Why does it say that?" I asked quietly. Maggie stiffened. "It's just easier. Companies mess things up if you tell them too much. God, Laura, don't get dramatic." Before I could respond, Brandon appeared from the living room, his expression sour. "Stirring trouble again," he muttered. "Leave the mail to us. Us. Not family. Not co-owners. Us." They were already drawing lines I wasn't supposed to cross. That night, after they went upstairs, I sat on my bed replaying every strange moment over the past month. The way Maggie always grabbed the mail. First, the packages addressed to her new last name, the bills she hid in drawers, the way she insisted on handling all the paperwork. It wasn't paranoia. Something was happening. The next morning during lunch break, I met Hannah outside the flower shop. We sat on the curb under a small patch of shade as I told her about the package and the word homeowner. Her face hardened as she listened. "Laura," she said slowly, "that's not a small thing. That's intentional." I swallowed. "What do you think it means?" "It means she's claiming something that isn't hers yet. She's setting the foundation for rewriting the story about the house, about you, about everything." My stomach twisted. Then she added, "If she's using that address on official documents, credit accounts, anything, that's financial exploitation. Or worse." My hands went numb. "I think she is," I whispered. "There have been receipts, credit lines, big purchases I didn't know about." "Then you need to look deeper," Hannah said, carefully. The idea terrified me, but the possibility of losing everything terrified me more. That evening, while cleaning the dining room for yet another Hudson dinner, I noticed the same drawer under the china cabinet slightly open again. Maggie must have rifled through it earlier. She always left chaos behind her. I glanced toward the hallway empty. My heart hammered as I slid the drawer open. More mail, more envelopes, more papers addressed to Margaret Hudson, primary resident homeowner, dozens of them. Credit card statements, bank letters, insurance mailers, even a pre-approved loan application. My hands shook as I sorted through the pile. Then I saw it. A crisp envelope marked Home Equity Credit Line pending approval. My vision tunneled for a moment. Only a homeowner could apply for something like that. And she didn't put both our names on it, just hers. My throat closed. She was trying to leverage the house for credit. My house, our parents' house. I shoved the papers back quickly when I heard voices approaching. I stepped away just in time as Maggie entered laughing loudly with one of the Hudson cousins. They didn't see me. They didn't know I was listening. "So, how much longer do you think you'll stay here?" the cousin asked. Maggie smiled smugly. "A few more months, maybe. We'll have enough for our down payment soon." "Thanks to Laura," the cousin said with a knowing laugh. "Please," Maggie scoffed. "She thinks she's helping. She's saving us a fortune." My lungs tightened, but I stayed still. Maggie lowered her voice to a whisper, but I heard every word. "Brandon and I calculated it. As long as she stays obedient, we save at least $1,800 a month. Free food, free utilities, free everything." We'd be stupid not to take advantage. Take advantage. The words lit a fuse inside me. She doesn't complain, the cousin asked. She won't, Maggie said confidently. She's too soft, too emotional. Always has been. She doesn't know how to stand up for herself. Honestly, she's perfect for this. Perfect for this. Like I was a tool, a function, a role, not a person. They walked away laughing. I stood frozen heat rushing to my face, my chest, my fingertips. I wasn't imagining anything. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't unstable. I was being used. After dinner, after hours of silently serving plates and listening to the Hudsons critique my cooking like judges, I waited until the house was quiet. Then I slipped into Maggie's room. I didn't plan to. My feet moved on their own. Her room was spotless, curated like a showroom. Soft gray blankets, velvet pillows, expensive candles she never let me light. On her nightstand sat a stack of shopping bags and a folder partially tucked beneath a jewelry box. My pulse quickened as I slid it out. Inside were copies of documents, emails, correspondence with a bank officer, a form titled Verification of Home Ownership Applicant, Margaret Hudson. The section labeled Proof of Residency listed only her name. My name wasn't anywhere, not even crossed out. It was like I didn't exist. I sank onto the edge of her bed, the room spinning. My breathing came fast and shallow. I'd always believed Maggie was messy, selfish, maybe thoughtless. But this was deliberate. This was coordinated. This was a plan. I shoved the folder back the moment I heard footsteps. I slipped out of the room and hurried quietly to mine, locking the door behind me. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, gripping the carpet to keep from shaking. I had been right to document everything. I had been right to listen to Hannah. And now I knew something terrifying. This wasn't about chores. This wasn't about stress. This wasn't about temporary help. They were anchoring their finances to my home. They were erasing me on paper. They were building a future that didn't include me, except as the unpaid labor that helped them get there. I pulled out my documentation notebook and wrote the date in heavy strokes. Then I wrote, "They're using my home address for credit. They're claiming to be the homeowners. They're saving money off my work. They think I am too weak to notice. But I see everything now. And I'm done pretending I don't." I woke up before my alarm that morning, long before the sun even began to turn the sky pale. For the first time in months, I didn't feel dread pressing against my ribs. Instead, there was a strange, steady calm sitting in the center of my chest, a kind of quiet strength I hadn't felt since before Maggie and the Hudsons moved in. It wasn't confidence exactly, more like resolve. I sat on the edge of my bed, letting the cool air settle over me, my fingers brushing across the thick notebook I kept hidden beneath the mattress. Every page was filled. Now dates, receipts, overheard conversations, bank statements, pictures of packages addressed to homeowner. I had written until my hand cramped. I had photographed until my phone storage almost ran out. Today I would turn all of that into something useful. I took a breath, opened my laptop, and typed the words I'd been too afraid to type before inheritance lawyer near me. The search results glowed in the dark room. My pulse quickened as I clicked the first link. A law office specializing in property rights, inheritance, disputes, and family financial abuse, words that made my stomach twist because they described my life too accurately. I swallowed and dialed the number. "This is Attorney Preston Hale's office," a woman answered warmly. I hesitated, then said I need help. Within minutes, I had an appointment scheduled. A real appointment, with a real attorney. And suddenly, the weight I'd been carrying for months shifted ever so slightly, like the first crack of light beneath a heavy door. I got dressed quietly and left my room notebook tucked deep inside my purse. The hallway was silent. Maggie and Brandon were still asleep. Perfect. I tiptoed past their door and slipped outside into the early morning chill. At the flower shop later, Hannah saw me walk in and immediately put down the bouquet she was arranging. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "I did it. I called a lawyer." Her eyes shone with relief. Good. Good, Laura. You're finally taking control. But the real test would come at home. By the time I walked through the front door again, Maggie was waiting for me in the kitchen with a stack of dishes in her arms and irritation already tightening her mouth. "You're late," she said. "We needed you here. The Hudsons are stopping by later." I hung my purse on the chair, keeping my face neutral. I had things to do. She frowned. Things? What things? I shrugged. My things. The confusion on her face flickered into something like suspicion. She wasn't used to me being vague. She wasn't used to me being anything but predictable. "Anyway," she said briskly, recovering, "I made a new list of what needs to be done today." "Don't forget the I'll get to it," I interrupted. Her mouth snapped shut. She wasn't sure what to do with that. Later that afternoon, when the Hudson relatives arrived, hovering around the living room like they owned the place, I didn't rush to serve them. I didn't fetch drinks. I didn't offer snacks. I just moved calmly, deliberately, doing only what I absolutely needed to. Maggie kept shooting me glances, small frowns tightening her eyebrows. Good. Let her wonder. When everyone finally left and the house quieted again, I pulled out my notebook and began making copies, digital and physical, of everything. Receipts, photos, notes, the photocopied will, Maggie's handwriting in the margins, her email drafts tucked in her drawer. Every document I'd found. I uploaded everything to a cloud drive, then hid a USB drive behind the canned vegetables in the pantry. No one looked there. As night settled, Maggie and Brandon retreated to their room. The house darkened. Floors creaked as the wood cooled. A faint hum from the refrigerator echoed into the silence. I stepped into the hallway and stared at my sister's closed door. I didn't want revenge for the sake of cruelty, but I wanted her to feel even a fraction of what she'd made me feel. Just enough to shake her. Just enough to make her wonder what was happening. Just enough to remind her that I wasn't powerless. Quiet as a shadow, I pushed open her door, slipped into the dark room, and picked up her phone from the nightstand. Brandon was snoring softly. Maggie's breathing was deeper, steady. I opened her alarm settings. Tomorrow was Saturday, her favorite day to sleep in. I changed the alarm from 6:30 a.m. to 4:00 a.m. I set a second one for 4:05 and a third one for 4:10. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been. As I stepped out of the room, I whispered to myself, "Let's see how you enjoy being jolted awake." When dawn arrived, the house erupted. Maggie's alarm blasted through the hallway, shrill, loud, furious. It didn't stop. She kept snoozing it, but each one followed. I listened from my room, smiling into my pillow, as Maggie's muffled curse echoed through the walls. "What the who changed my alarm?" Brandon groaned. "Turn it off. It won't stop." "I didn't set these." They stumbled downstairs 15 minutes later, exhausted eyes, puffy hair sticking out in all directions. When they saw me in the kitchen, wide awake and stirring coffee, Maggie shot daggers at me. "Did you touch my phone?" she demanded. I lifted a brow. "Why would I? You think you're funny," she snapped. "This isn't a game, Laura." "No," I agreed, pouring myself a cup. "It's not." She stared at me, suspicious, confused, thrown off balance. Then she took a sip of the coffee I had made, her entire face contorted. "What is this? It tastes like burnt dirt." "Oh no," I said, feigning concern. "Is it too strong?" "Sorry. I thought you said you preferred bold flavors." Her eyes narrowed. "You're messing with me." I shrugged. "Maybe you're just being sensitive." The look she gave me was a mixture of shock and outrage, like I'd broken some unspoken rule she thought I'd follow forever. Good. Let her feel the cracks forming. The next few hours were a strange dance. Maggie hovered, watching me, trying to judge whether my small acts of defiance were intentional or accidental. She checked doors twice. She glanced at her phone repeatedly. She whispered to Brandon in short, clipped sentences. Her control was slipping. By early afternoon, I slipped out again, walked down the street and into Attorney Hale's office. The room smelled like leather and paper, warm and safe. He was a gray-haired man, with kind eyes, but a firm voice. someone who had clearly seen too many family stories just like mine. I spread the evidence across his desk: photos, notes, receipts, bank mail, the altered will. He examined everything carefully. His eyebrows rose more than once. "Laura," he said finally, "you've been living in a situation of severe financial and emotional abuse." The words stung because they were true. "This is more than controlling behavior," he continued. "This is exploitation. Possibly fraud." "Can I stop them?" I whispered. "Yes," he said. "You can. In fact, you have every right to." He explained the process of formal eviction for tenants at will, documentation, legal notices, protections against retaliation. He promised to handle every step so I wouldn't have to confront Maggie myself. "When you're ready," he said, "we'll serve them." And for the first time in months, my lungs filled all the way. When I walked home later, the sun was setting, washing the house in orange light. Maggie peeked at me from the living room, eyes still narrowed, still uncertain. She had no idea what was coming. I passed her without a word and went to my room. I added one last sentence to my notebook for the day one of taking my power back. And then, as if the universe wanted to seal the moment, my phone buzzed. A message from attorney: "Hale documents will be ready soon. Once served, they will have 30 days to leave." I closed my eyes. The countdown had begun. The door had barely closed behind me when I saw a small package sitting on the porch table near the welcome mat, neat and perfectly square, like something handled with intention. Sunset light glowed off the white cardboard. I wasn't expecting anything, and Maggie usually intercepted every delivery before I even noticed them, so curiosity tugged me forward. I picked it up. The name on the label made my stomach twist. "Margaret Hudson, homeowner, our address." That word again. Homeowner. It stared at me like an accusation, like a warning, like a truth. Maggie was rewriting in slow, insidious steps. My hand tightened around the package. I stood there frozen for several seconds, the evening breeze brushing my skin as panic bubbled quietly in my chest. When I finally opened the front door, I barely got a foot inside before Maggie appeared out of nowhere, her expression pinched. "Why are you touching that?" she snapped, snatching the box from my arms. "It was on the porch," I said. "You don't need to bring in my mail," she said sharply. "Just leave things where they are. I'll handle deliveries." Handle, control, own. Every word she spoke lately felt like it had teeth. Brandon's voice drifted in from the living room. "We already talked about this, Laura. Don't touch things that aren't yours. Not yours. Not yours." It echoed in my mind like a warning shot. I walked straight to my room without replying, but my hands were trembling when I closed the door. I pressed my back against it and let out a long breath, my pulse beating so hard it almost hurt. Something inside that package mattered. Something she didn't want me to see. And I knew in my bones that this wasn't paranoia anymore. Something was happening behind the scenes. Something Maggie and her husband were orchestrating, and I was the last one they wanted finding out. I needed clarity. The next day at work, I found a quiet moment to sit beside the hydrangeas in the back and call Hannah. "You found another package?" she asked, voice tight. "Yes," I said. "Homeowner. Again." Hannah exhaled sharply. "Laura, they're building a financial identity using your home. That's not small. That's not just rude. That's calculated." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "I need to know what's going on," I whispered. "I need more than receipts." "Then we look deeper," she said. "And I think you should check the house. Carefully. They're leaving clues." Her confidence steadied me. When I got home that evening, the Hudsons were laughing loudly in the living room. Maggie was perched on the couch with a wine glass in her hand, animatedly telling some story that made her in-laws howl with laughter. They barely noticed me enter. Good. I slipped quietly toward the dining room where the china cabinet sat like a silent witness. My heart thrummed as I pulled open the bottom drawer. It was full again. Envelopes, bank letters, credit card notices, all addressed to homeowner, all addressed to our address, all addressed to someone who wasn't legally allowed to claim that title. My breath caught when I saw a thick envelope labeled credit line increase. Confirmed, then another loan application under review. And then a pre-approval notice for a home improvement credit line, something only a homeowner could legally apply for. My pulse roared in my ears. I shoved the papers back into the drawer when I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I stepped away just in time as Maggie entered the dining room. She walked past me like I was a shadow, silent, unnoticed, until she saw something on the floor. She picked up a small slip of paper and laughed under her breath. "Brandon," she called. "Your bank called again. They want updated proof of residency." "Updated proof of residency!" She tucked the paper into her pocket and walked away. But the phrase latched onto me like a hook. Proof of residency. Updated, again. I barely noticed she left the room. My mind was spinning. Then, something inside me snapped into place. A click, a turning gear. A realization that made my skin prickle. They weren't just using my home. They weren't just living rent-free. They were anchoring their financial credibility to my address, to the property my parents left behind. They were using it to build the foundation of something, a loan, a credit line, a future house, maybe even a second property. My house was their stepping stone. And I wasn't just invisible, they needed me invisible. I drifted down the hallway in a daze, my thoughts swarming, until I heard voices coming from Maggie's room. Her door was cracked open slightly. She was on the phone. I knew it was wrong to listen. But I also knew no one had protected me from being listened to. "No, it's perfect," Maggie was saying, her voice sweet and confident. "We're saving so much living here. Once we move out, everything will fall into place." Pause. "We didn't expect Laura to last this long, honestly. But she's easy to manage. She does whatever we tell her." My heart throbbing painfully, I leaned closer. "It's like having a built-in maid," she said, laughing. "A built-in maid. She won't fight us. She never does," Maggie continued. "That's why we're safe to use her address. She won't question anything. Safe to use her address." My hand tightened on the doorframe. Then she said the part that froze my entire body. "We calculated it, with her doing everything, we save $1,800 a month. 2 years of that, we'll have our down payment easily." My vision swam. Down payment. Using my house, my labor, my utilities, my life, as their financial cushion. Maggie laughed again, light and cruel. "Once the loan comes through, we're gone, and she can have her little house back." I staggered away from the door as quietly as I could, my heartbeat pounding in my ears like a drum. By the time I reached the kitchen, I was gripping the counter to keep from collapsing. Tears filled my eyes, not from sadness but fury. Fury so sharp it nearly made me dizzy. I wiped them away quickly. I would not cry over them anymore. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started recording as I opened drawers, located receipts, took photos of the envelopes. Every document, every detail, every scrap of evidence. I photographed the household duties, staff assignment sheet they'd dropped. I took pictures of the packages. I photographed the drawer filled with mail. I added it all to a new digital folder labeled Evidence, Fraud and Exploitation. Then I backed it up twice. When I finally sat down on my bed, I felt something powerful wash over me, not fear but clarity. Not helplessness but direction. I knew what needed to happen. The next morning, I gathered everything, USB drive photos, copies of the will, and went straight to Attorney Hale's office. He listened quietly, flipping through the documents as his expression darkened. "This," he said, finally tapping a finger against the stack of papers, "is deliberate, calculated, and unlawful." My throat tightened. "So what do?" I whispered. "You protect your home," he said. "You protect yourself. And we start by serving them an eviction notice." I couldn't breathe for a moment. Evict them. Evict my sister. Evict the people who had turned my parents' home into their personal playground. "Are you sure?" I asked, voice trembling. The lawyer met my eyes. "Laura," he said gently, "you didn't start this war, but you have every right to end it." I exhaled shakily. By the time I walked out of his office, the sun was setting behind the buildings, washing everything in warm orange light. A light breeze brushed through my hair as I held the folder of legal documents tight against my chest. When I got home, Maggie looked up from the couch, eyes narrowing when she saw the folder. But she didn't know yet. She had no idea what was inside. She had no idea how close the ground beneath her feet was to collapsing. I passed her calmly, my heart steady, my steps sure. In the quiet of my bedroom, I wrote a single sentence in my documentation notebook. They're planning their future on the ruins of mine. But that ends now. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I slept through the night. The morning of the eviction felt strangely peaceful, like the air was holding its breath before a storm. I woke earlier than my alarm, long before the sky began to lighten, and lay there staring at the faint outline of the ceiling. Today would be the day everything changed. Today, Attorney Hale would arrive at 5 sharp with the legal officer, and Maggie's perfect little empire, her chore lists, her control, her bogus title of homeowner would collapse. For a few minutes, I just sat at the edge of my bed, steadying my breathing, grounding myself the way Hannah had taught me. Then, I looked down at the folder, tucked into my tote bag, the eviction documents printed freshly the day before. Today, I whispered into the quiet room, I take my house back. I dressed, fixed my hair, and walked downstairs with a calmness Maggie clearly didn't expect. She was already in the kitchen, swinging a spatula like a conductor waving a baton, clearly irritated. "There you are," she snapped, without turning around. "Hudson's are coming early, so you'll need to get breakfast started immediately. Eggs, bacon, toast, and the table set by 6. Do not screw it up today, I don't have the patience." I opened the fridge door and looked at her reflection in the stainless steel. "I'll get to it," I said casually. She whipped around. "Excuse me, you heard me," I said, pulling out the carton of eggs. "I'll get to it." Her eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to say something cutting, but for once, nothing came out. She was thrown off by my lack of panic, my lack of rushing. I didn't scramble. I didn't apologize. I didn't shrink. Instead, I made breakfast slowly, deliberately. And then I made her coffee, the last gourmet breakfast I would ever prepare for her. She demanded bold roast, so I made it bold, bitter, overly strong, harmless but enough to leave her grimacing. When I set her cup in front of her, she raised it to her lips and immediately recoiled. "What is wrong with this?" she sputtered. "It tastes like burnt charcoal." I kept my expression neutral. "Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted something strong." Brandon entered, then groggy and still half asleep. He took one sip from his own cup and spat it into the sink. "Laura, seriously, are you trying to poison us?" I shrugged. "Maybe you're both just being sensitive." Maggie stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't quite find her footing. She was used to me apologizing, scrambling, fixing everything in silence. She wasn't used to calm resistance. "You're going to redo all of this," she said finally, pointing at the cups like a queen issuing a decree. "No," I said simply. Her jaw dropped. Brandon turned toward me in disbelief. "What do you mean no?" "It means no," I repeated. The kitchen froze around us. The refrigerator hummed. A bird chirped outside. Maggie's eyes flickered confusion, then fear, then anger, all swirling together. But before she could respond, she switched tactics. I saw the shift in her shoulders, the way she softened her voice. "You're acting very strange lately," she said, as though she were diagnosing a child. "This isn't you. Are you okay? Do you need help?" Manipulation dripping from every word. "I'm fine," I said. "Well, we need to tighten the schedule then." She continued, ignoring me. "You've clearly lost structure again. Starting tomorrow, you will wake up at 5 every day to prepare." "You won't need to worry about tomorrow," I said. She blinked. "What does that mean?" I smiled politely. "You'll see." Her irritation simmered. She was on edge, restless, unsettled. She kept glancing at me throughout the day, trying to catch hints of something, but I moved through the house with practiced calm. By noon, I left to meet Attorney Hale at a cafe down the street. He reviewed the timeline one last time. 5 p.m., he reminded me. We'll arrive with the officer. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to defend anything. You only need to stand your ground. I will, I said, gripping my coffee cup. He nodded approvingly. You're doing the right thing. When I returned home, Maggie confronted me the moment I stepped inside. Where were you? She demanded. Out, we're handling my things, I said. The things I need to take care of. You're being secretive, she said, her voice rising. I smiled slightly. Maybe I am, she froze. That answer didn't fit into any of the mental boxes she had designed for me. The rest of the afternoon was a standoff. She issued soft orders, then sharp ones. I ignored them with polite distance. She tried guilt. She tried threats. She tried tears in the hallway, at one point muffled sobs that I knew were for performance. But I didn't take the bait, because the countdown was almost over. At 4:47 p.m., the kitchen clock ticked loudly, each second echoing like a drum. My heart thudded in anticipation, but my face remained composed. I wiped down the counter, slowly, breathing evenly. Maggie stormed in. You haven't started dinner, she scolded. I wouldn't waste ingredients, I said very calmly. Confusion flickered across her features. What are you talking about? I glanced toward the front door. You'll find out. She threw her hands up. You're acting insane. At 5:00 p.m., sharp, the doorbell rang, 5 heavy knocks that reverberated through the entire house. Maggie rolled her eyes. Laura, get the door. I'm busy. I didn't move. Laura, she snapped. Don't make me repeat myself. Brandon yelled from the living room. Just open the door. I walked to the entryway and unlocked it. Standing there were Attorney Hale and a uniformed legal officer. For a moment, the entire world stood still. Is Margaret Hudson present? The officer asked. I stepped aside. Yes, I said, my voice steady. Please come in. Maggie walked toward us, irritation still etched on her face. This better be quick, she said. We have things to do. The officer opened a large envelope and read from the document inside with official precision. This is a formal eviction notice. You and all occupants residing under your name have 30 days to vacate this property. The color drained from Maggie's face. What? No, this is a mistake, she stammered. You can't. This is my house. It is not, Attorney Hale said firmly. It is co-owned. And you do not have legal permission to live here. You have 30 days. Brandon leaped up from the couch, red-faced. Laura, what is this? What did you do? I looked at him evenly. I reclaimed my home. Maggie's hands shook as she tore open the envelope. Her eyes darted across the words, tenant at will, 30-day notice, unlawful occupancy, property rights. This is cruelty, she whispered. You're cruel. You're heartless. You're abandoning your own sister. I'm protecting myself, I said softly. From you. A strangled sound escaped her throat. How could you? Brandon stepped forward, pointing a finger at me. Undo this. Right now. Call him off. No. You owe us, he hissed. We kept this house running, I laughed. I actually laughed. I kept this house running. You exploited it. Hudson mother, who must have arrived earlier without me noticing, stood up shaking with fury. You ungrateful girl. We opened our hearts to you. This is how you repay us. You used me, I said. All of you. The officer cleared his throat. If you violate the terms of this notice physically, verbally, or through property damage, we will escalate this legally. Maggie's face crumpled as she turned to me again. Please, don't do this. We don't have anywhere to go. You had 6 months, I said. You chose to use me instead of preparing for your future. She sobbed, covering her face. I can't believe you're doing this. But I could. I finally could. The officer handed her the final copy of the notice. 30 days, he repeated. Maggie shook her head, crying, trying to pull sympathy from me the way she always had. But something inside me had closed. Something permanent. I met her eyes one last time. You should start packing. Her sob broke into silence. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The first 24 hours after the eviction notice felt like living inside a pressure cooker. Every room in the house hummed with resentment, fear, and barely contained rage. Maggie didn't speak to me that night. She didn't even look in my direction. She locked herself in her room with Brandon, and the muffled arguments started almost immediately. Angry whispers, raised voices, footsteps pounding back and forth. I didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. They were panicking. The next morning, the war began. I was in the kitchen making myself a quiet breakfast, just toast and tea, when Maggie appeared in the doorway with swollen eyes and trembling hands. For a moment, I thought she might apologize. She didn't. Instead, she spoke in a small, broken voice that would have fooled anyone who didn't know her as well as I did. "Laura, can we talk?" I set my cup down. "Go ahead." She walked in slowly, almost timidly, and sat at the table across from me, twisting the edge of her sweater between her fingers. "I didn't sleep last night," she said. "I've been thinking about everything, and I think I understand why you're upset." I waited. "I know things haven't been perfect," she continued softly. "I know we've asked a lot of you, maybe too much. And maybe we didn't show enough appreciation." The performance was flawless, downcast eyes, shaky breaths, voice cracking at just the right moments. Anyone else would have believed her, but I had seen her face when she thought I wasn't looking. I had seen the rage, the entitlement, the calculation. "You hurt me, Laura," she whispered, placing a hand over her heart. "I can't believe you'd throw us out over a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I asked. "Yes," she said, eagerly leaning forward. "We can fix this. We can all start fresh. You don't have to go through with the eviction. If you cancel it, we'll make this right." I promise. There it was, the bargain, the bribe disguised as reconciliation. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked quietly. She brightened instantly, mistaking my calm for interest. "We'll pay rent. $600 a month between both of us. And we'll handle our own meals, our own laundry, our own chores. We won't ask you to do anything for us anymore. You can rest. You can have your space back." I held her gaze. "And the credit lines, the loans, the mail addressed to homeowner." She flinched. "That was a mistake. A stupid mistake. I'll fix all of it. I'll close every card. I'll update the address. I swear." I let the silence stretch, watching her squirm. Then she reached across the table and grabbed my hands like she used to when we were children, her palms icy. "Please, Laura," she whispered. "We're family. We can't lose each other over something like this. I'm begging you, don't do this. Don't let that lawyer come between us." My heart tightened, not with guilt, but with grief. Grief for the sister I thought I knew. Grief for the person she had chosen to become. "I'm not canceling the eviction," I said softly. Her face collapsed. 30 days, Maggie. That's the law." She stared at me as if I had slapped her. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't part of an act. They were rage. "You're unbelievable," she breathed. "You're punishing me. You're loving this, aren't you?" "No," I said. "But I won't let you keep destroying my life." She stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. "You're cruel," she spat. "Heartless. A selfish monster." She stormed out. A second later, I heard her sobbing loudly, loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. But I didn't chase her. I wasn't the one who needed saving. By midday, Brandon's strategy was different. He approached me calmly, the way you approach a stranger you want something from. "Laura," he said, leaning against the counter with forced casualness, "I think we got off on the wrong foot." I didn't respond. "We're all adults here," he continued. "Things happened, mistakes were made. But an eviction, that's extreme. It's unnecessary. It hurts everyone." I folded a kitchen towel and set it aside. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "I know Maggie can be a handful, but she loves you, and I'm trying to take care of my family. Help me out here." "You've been helping yourself," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me, you both used my house," I said. "My money, my labor, my identity. You took advantage, he scoffed. We're family. That's what family does. They help each other. Help, I said quietly, doesn't mean exploitation. He groaned and ran a hand through his hair. So what? You're just going to throw us out on the street. You want Maggie to resent you forever. She already resents me, I replied, but at least this way she won't control me. His expression darkened. You're making a mistake, he said. A big one. You'll regret this. I met his gaze steadily. No, I really won't. He exhaled sharply, muttering something under his breath before stomping upstairs. The next few days were a nightmare of their own design. Maggie cried loudly at random intervals, making sure I heard. Brandon slammed doors. The Hudsons called constantly, leaving voicemails about my cruelty. But I didn't budge. Instead, I disappeared for long walks. I met with Attorney Hale twice. I spoke with Hannah every day. I made copies of everything. I hid documents in safe places. I kept my distance. The timeline marched forward. 26 days left. 24. 21. On the 15th day, the tone shifted again. Late at night, Maggie knocked on my door softly, her voice trembling. Laura, can I talk to you? I hesitated, then opened the door a crack. She looked different, not angry, not manipulative, but defeated. Her eyes were red, her cheeks blotchy. She held a crumpled tissue in her hand. I'm pregnant, she whispered. I froze. She clasped her hands together under her chin. 6 weeks. I found out 2 days ago. I was going to tell you over dinner next month. I wanted it to be special. She sobbed, then her shoulders shaking. Please don't make us leave. I can't move while pregnant. I can't handle that stress. I can't bring a baby into a life like that. My heart sank, not because of guilt, but because of how predictably timed the revelation was. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked. I was scared, she whispered. I didn't want you to think it was manipulation. But it was. Every second of it. Maggie, I said softly, if you are pregnant, you need your own home, your own space, your own stability. Her lip quivered. You're heartless. No, I said quietly. But I'm not your doormat anymore. She stared at me with pure fury. You'll regret this, she hissed. You'll regret everything. I closed the door. I didn't cry. Not even once. On the 29th day, they began packing. Furniture thudded on the floors. Boxes piled by the doorway. Clothes spilled across the hall. They argued, blamed me, insulted me where they thought I could hear. But beneath it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Lightness, relief, freedom blooming just beneath my ribs. On the 30th morning, I woke early, not because they demanded it, but because I wanted to watch the sunrise over my yard, my house, my peace, my life. And by the afternoon, they would all be gone. Finally. The morning they finally left the house felt unnaturally still, quiet in a way it hadn't been in months. Not the suffocating silence of resentment, not the tense silence of unspoken threats, but a clean, open silence. A silence that belonged to me again. Maggie and Brandon spent the early hours stomping through the hallway, slamming doors, dragging boxes loudly enough to make a statement. Their frustration echoed down the staircase like heavy weights hitting the floor. But I stayed in the kitchen, sipping tea, watching the steam curl upward. For once, the noise didn't sink into my bones. It drifted past me, powerless. Around 9, Brandon came down carrying 2 suitcases, his jaw clenched. Hope you're happy, he muttered. You've ruined this family. I stirred my tea gently. No, I said, meeting his eyes. This family was ruined long before I did anything. I'm just choosing to stop letting it ruin me. He scoffed and walked out the door, letting it slam behind him. A few minutes later, Maggie appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Her eyes were swollen, but the anger had settled into something harsher: resentment, bitterness, blame. She stood there, holding a box of shoes. She never even wore her hair. Pulled back messily, the confident sister I knew transformed into something fragile and furious. She hovered there for a long time, like she was waiting for me to say something. anything. When I didn't, she spoke first. "You know," she said, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper, "you didn't have to destroy everything." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't destroy anything. I protected what was already mine. Her lip trembled. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the girl she used to be, my little sister who ran to me during thunderstorms, the one who used to braid my hair and beg me not to leave for school without her. But that girl was long gone, buried beneath entitlement and control. "You're going to regret this," she said. "And when you do, don't come crawling back to me." I set my tea down gently. "I think what hurts you most," I said quietly, "is that I finally learned how to stop crawling in the first place." The words hit her like a slap. Her eyes filled with tears, real ones this time. She opened her mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Instead, she turned abruptly, walking past me toward the open door. Her footsteps were unsteady, each one, a bitter punctuation mark in the hallway. At the doorway, she paused again, her hand gripping the box so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I hope you enjoy your empty house," she said coldly. "Your empty life." Then she left. The moment the door clicked shut, my entire body exhaled. My shoulders dropped. My heart steadied. The house fell quiet again, completely, beautifully quiet. I sat alone at the kitchen table, letting the finality of her departure wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt the soft warmth of the morning sun stretch across the floor, without anyone barking orders, criticizing my work, or claiming ownership of things that weren't theirs. My house felt like my own skin again. After they drove away, 3 trips in their car, each time glancing bitterly back at the house, as if expecting me to chase after them, I walked slowly through every room. The living room was a mess of dust and abandoned shopping bags. The guest room looked like a tornado had hit it. The dining table still had fingerprints from the countless nights I served them dinner like a waitress in my own home. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt free. I cleaned at my own pace. I opened the windows and let fresh air sweep through the rooms. I threw away the chore lists Maggie had taped to the fridge. I gathered the receipts they left scattered around and put them in a neat pile labeled, "For my lawyer." Then I lit a candle, not the fancy untouched ones Maggie showed off to her friends, but a simple lavender one I bought months ago and never allowed myself to use. As the scent drifted through the room, something inside me loosened. My hands stopped shaking. My breath deepened. I wasn't a maid anymore. I wasn't being monitored, manipulated, or dismissed. I was alone, but in a good way, in a healing way. By the time afternoon sunlight filled the kitchen, the house felt lighter, almost as if it were thanking me for reclaiming it. Weeks passed, and slowly my life found its rhythm again. I went back to the flower shop full-time. I started taking afternoon walks through the neighborhood. I bought small things for myself, new slippers, a plant for the windowsill, a soft blanket for the couch. Nothing extravagant. Just simple pleasures that had once felt impossible. I saw Hannah often. We met for coffee, talked for hours, laughed in ways I hadn't laughed since before Maggie moved in. She told me over and over that she was proud of me, proud of my courage, proud of the strength I didn't even know I had. Sometimes I still felt the ache of what had happened, the lingering sting of betrayal. But it didn't control me anymore. It didn't consume me. It reminded me of a truth I needed to learn. Family doesn't give anyone the right to take your life away. A few months later, Maggie called. Her number blinking on my phone made my stomach twist reflexively, not with fear, but with instinct. I let it ring twice before I answered. She didn't say hello. She didn't apologize. She told me she needed money, that the apartment she and Brandon moved into was too expensive, that Brandon couldn't keep up with his new job, that they were behind on rent, that maybe we could start over. I listened quietly. Then I said, "I hope things get better for you," and I hung up. My hands didn't shake, my heart didn't race. I didn't feel guilt, just clarity. People who hurt you repeatedly don't deserve to walk back in just because they're struggling. Loving myself meant enforcing the boundaries I fought so hard to build. As time went on, the house became a sanctuary again. A place where I cooked for myself, watched movies when I wanted, walked barefoot on the clean wooden floors, and enjoyed the peaceful quiet that once felt like loneliness, but now felt like freedom. 1 year later, on a soft autumn morning, I sat on the porch with a warm mug of tea and watched the leaves fall in slow spirals to the ground. The breeze carried the scent of pine from the woods nearby. I breathed it in deeply. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And that was enough. If you stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. Truly, it means more than you know. If parts of my journey reminded you of your own, or if you've ever faced a toxic family situation, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. If this story touched you, tap like, hit subscribe, and stay with me because I share new real-life stories every day. Stories of resilience, betrayal, healing, and the quiet victories that change everything. You're not alone, and I hope you'll be here for the next story too.